Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining eGroup's summer webinar series, where today we will be discussing how to save time by simplifying VDI deployments with Nutanix Frame and Microsoft Azure. With 2 decades worth of IT experience, we're excited to be joined today by our speaker, Mike Dent, eGroup's Director of Data Center Architecture. Before we get started, if you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to ask them in the chat box below. We will be answering any and all questions at the end of the webinar. So with that being said, take it away, Mike.
Thanks, Carly. And I will learn to share my screen here. I'm gonna make myself presenter and we'll get this going. Hopefully you'll be able to see my slide deck here in a minute, as well as eventually a live demo. You know how all these live demos typically go. So we'll hopefully see some success with a live demo. Carly, can you confirm the slide deck is on the screen for me?
Yes. Right now it looks like you're in PowerPoint. If you could please zoom in to presentation mode.
Yep, I am in presentation mode. Or I thought I was.
Perfect.
Got it. All right, let's get the show on the road. All right, so good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you're coming in from. So today we're going to talk about simplifying VDI, right? We've been doing VDI for years, 20 plus years, in fact, in the end user computing space. And over the course of time, it hasn't gotten that much easier, right? So I remember doing my first technical VDI deployment back in 1997 on Citrix WinFrame for about 15,000 users. And it took us months to get the infrastructure, the applications, and the users kind of onboarded and ready to go. And so from that kind of 20 plus years ago to where we are today, we haven't gotten that much different from the onboarding of users, right? Infrastructure still has a large scope to the overall kind of project for these deployments. Applications are still difficult to install, difficult to kind of wrap our heads around, and then we get into printing and the other facets of end user computing that really, it becomes the bane of everybody's existence from an end user computing perspective. So we look at how can we simplify VDI. Really, it comes down to a couple different areas, right? One is the solution we're using, 2 is the platform we're using, and 3 is kind of the overall scope from how our end users can access number 1 and number 2, right? So really, those 3 things really to me are kind of the bare necessities for how we can successfully deploy VDI today. And really, when we look at Nutanix Frame, it's also called Nutanix Xi Frame, if you've heard of it before, and Microsoft Azure gives us the capabilities for simplified deployments from an infrastructure perspective, both from a cloud native approach for VDI management, as well as cloud utilization for our desktops. So again, very simplified approach, really kind of starts to turn our legacy VDI approach on its head. A little bit about eGroup for those of you that haven't heard, or those of you that have heard about us. eGroup was founded in 1999, so we are going to be celebrating our 20th year this year, so it's exciting for us. 2 decades of delivering successful outcomes for customers. eGroup started in the end user computing space with Citrix, right? So we've grown from that, both on-prem with data center focus as well as cloud focus. Privately owned, debt-free business. Keep that very forefront on our minds. Proud about that. National, international solutions delivery experience. We've gone outside the U.S. to deliver great solutions, Canada, Europe, and Asia. Over 500 customers across the East Coast and the United States, across a variety of silos, right? So we don't kind of focus in one specific area. We really enjoy going to different customers to be able to evaluate, learn, and deploy solutions across customer base. Some recent recognition for us. I'm not going to go into these deep, but just know that we pride ourselves on doing good work. We like our customers to know that we keep them forefront of the mind, and we're here for the customer. We're here to work with them and make their solutions better, and then to really understand what their business is going to be to help them kind of grow and succeed. Let's get into this. VDI is not as simple as we want it to be, right? I think everybody can kind of agree with that. It comes down to experience versus scale, right? End user experience for VDI is critical. We can't be putting VDI solutions out that don't perform well, that take forever to log in, that just don't give the end user performance. You know, if I open Outlook and it takes 2.5 minutes to open Outlook, well, that end user experience is not great. So we have to balance that end user experience with scale, right? How do we scale successfully? How do we scale quickly? You know, I was working with a customer here recently that in the fourth quarter, they typically scale by 5 to 400 users, 50 to 400 users, depending on their need and the scope of what their fourth quarter is going to look like. So how can they quickly scale this VDI environment to be able to handle that? Well, on-prem solutions, you know, if we're planning for that, we've got a lot of excess capacity throughout the year. So looking at the infrastructure required, we've got to really be able to scale out to handle that end user scale from any given time of the year perspective, right? To be able to quickly scale, contract when we don't need it. We can't do that very well on-prem infrastructure, right? It takes a lot of pieces, connection brokers, load balancers, web servers, licensing, databases. A lot of things go into this, right? So there's a lot of infrastructure required for VDI, and it hasn't gotten that much different over the course of time. In fact, if we look about 20 years ago from what VDI, what we started with, to now, the infrastructure required from a server component really has gotten that much more, right? It's gotten a lot more from a server, from a functionality perspective. And we're starting to see both Citrix and VMware start to move towards the cloud with Citrix Cloud, for example, and Horizon View in the cloud. But still, it takes a lot of infrastructure to put this stuff together. And we get into deployment time, right? Deployment time, both for production and DR design. How do we successfully design our production environment? How do we successfully design a disaster recovery scenario? And how do we merge those two together from an end user experience perspective? You know, deployment time still takes a lot from our networking, storage, compute teams. You know, that we've got to have interaction between all three of these or more from the application owners. So it takes a while, right, to get VDI up and going. And then speed, right? You know, goes right with hand in hand with deployment time. Slow with multiple teams, right? You might have the best teams in the world, but there's still interaction. There's still a delay in interaction between the teams. Hard to scale up fast, and DR resiliency, right? These are things that we can't do necessarily without deep pockets all the time of scaling correctly, or scaling fast, or scaling to handle our end user requirements. So again, VDI is not as simple. But now we enter the cloud, right? So what can the cloud do for us? And the cloud is not necessarily a destination, it's an operational model. And me being an on-prem data center person, I struggle with this a little bit, right? It is an operational model, and I completely understand that. But to me, we still have to put our four walls around the cloud. We still have to design for scalability, security, and other things. So the cloud, what it's providing us is really a standards and scalable model that we can quickly and easily grow into. Very coordinated effort, very understanding capacity, operational expenses. That's all right in front of us. We see this, it's there. We don't have to guess what we're going to spend. You know, software versus hardware based. How do we evaluate what we're locked into today on-prem? When we get to the cloud, it's very open. We can integrate with a lot of different scenarios right now. If you look at Azure, every time you log into the Azure portal, there's new services, new integrations, new scenarios we can now build. And it's also bringing IT back into check, right? Setting expectations around what we can and can't do, where we can and can't do it, and what costs are associated with it. The cloud is very similar to me to when virtualization became popular, right? Everybody started seeing, oh, I can build these VMs now. We get VM sprawl. And all of a sudden, it became this massive thing where nobody knew what was going on because we had poor cost controls. Now we get the ability to step back with the cloud and say, you might be able to spin up machines, but I can now cost control a lot better. I understand what my resources are being utilized at. So a lot of things about the cloud make the journey for VDI very simple, but it's still not as simple as it overall could be, right? We still have to have a lot of integration points. So kind of enter the next phase of VDI for me is Nutanix Frame. Nutanix acquired Frame middle of last year or so. They were a European-based, born in the cloud VDI company. They focused initially on AWS, So again, they've been completely cloud native from day one. So I'm going to do now is go, I got 4 parts to the rest of this slide deck. Frame 101, just kind of giving you a high level of Frame, the architecture of Frame, integrating how it integrates with cloud and Azure. We're going to go into a live demo, hopefully. Again, fingers crossed that always works. And then we're going to get into some key advantages of Frame and why Frame really becomes a simplified approach for deploying VDI. So hopefully this video works, right? This is actually Frame actively running in a browser. Frame runs entirely in a modern browser. Modern browser is going to be defined as Chrome, Firefox, even Microsoft Edge. Safari is a little bit supported. But what we can see with Frame is that it's entirely browser-based. There's nothing to install, so this is going to run across a variety of devices. It's very simple to use from an end-user perspective. Again, this just kind of gives you an idea of what's going on with Frame. Very quick view of it. We're going to jump into kind of what this all means right now. So what is Nutanix Frame? It's a secure platform that delivers Windows, apps, and desktops to any users on a device with a web browser. This could be a phone, could be a tablet, could be a laptop, kiosk, you name it. And we're delivering VMs just like we have historically with VDI, both server and desktop VMs to an end user, right? Across a variety of devices. That's the goal. That's kind of table stakes. We have to be able to deliver desktops and apps. Why is Frame a little bit different, right? So when we start to look at it, it's any app, again, table stakes, right? I've got to be able to install my corporate applications, my custom applications, my office applications, integrated with any storage and identity, right? So we'll see on here from an authorization perspective, Frame has a wide berth of who they use for authentication and authorization, right? We can do our traditional Active Directory integration. We can integrate with any other SAML2 provider, right? So wide berth of authentication, and as well as storage. Pretty neat for Xi Frame, kind of unique in this case, is that for OneDrive, for example, and Box and Dropbox, there's no software to integrate into our master image. Frame actually has customized integration with Microsoft, Box, and Dropbox for native integration directly to the Frame desktop for these file services. So if you're a OneDrive for Business user, you can authenticate against OneDrive for Business without ever installing the OneDrive application in the desktop. Any infrastructure, AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, and others, right? Continuing to increase our capabilities for our desktop infrastructure, right? So again, born in the cloud, integration with public cloud. That's kind of their key takeaway there. And access from any browser, right? Again, Safari is kind of limited on there, Safari and Internet Explorer. But if we're using a modern browser, really, this is all the user is going to need. So hyperconverged clouds, right? So how does Frame really work here, right? So the control plane for the cloud, or control plane for Frame, is hosted in the cloud, meaning there's nothing we're managing for Frame. There's no on-prem infrastructure requirements, software VMs that we have to manage for Frame. That's completely hosted in the cloud by Nutanix. They manage the management side to it, but we have full tenancy to our own infrastructure, our own kind of instance of Frame to be able to manage. And then what we do is we spin up different resource locations in a variety of locations: AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. That third one on the right is new for Frame as of this year, which is going to be on-premise Frame. So that's a nice integration that we've got now. So again, cloud managed, on-prem, or cloud hosted desktops, right? So we've decoupled now our full management plane, and we just log into our Frame instance and we can manage our desktops in any location that we want. So cloud infrastructure consumption. 2 different ways we can do this. One is through native to Frame. So you use their infrastructure, meaning you ride on their AWS, their Azure accounts, and everything is provisioned within them. That's kind of the all-in-one. The other side is I get my Frame tenant, and then I can connect to different resources in different cloud locations, AWS, Azure, different public clouds as I need. So that would then run against my own billing account. So as I spin desktops up in Azure, for example, that would come off against either my CSP credits or my pay-as-you-go credits. If I do the all-in-one, everything is charged through Frame directly from Nutanix. So two, let's look at the architecture for Frame and see kind of where this starts to diverge from different on-prem solutions today, such as Citrix Zen Desktop and Zen App, or Citrix Apps and Desktops as it's now called, Horizon View from VMware. See where it starts to differentiate. So one, VDI made very simple. So we pick our infrastructure. Where are we going? Compute, graphics, network. What cloud are we going to? Or on-prem with Nutanix on-prem infrastructure. Authorize our users. How are we going to authenticate the users? Is this going to be just native authentication to Frame, or are we going to tie this into some sort of directory authentication, such as ADFS, or some other custom provider? Bring your apps. The first three really are kind of standard, right? The difference being now we can easily and quickly pick our cloud platforms versus being tied into on-prem or needing to figure out a different way to integrate with other cloud providers. So 1, 2, and 3, pretty simple. 4, we're going to connect our files to whatever storage platform we want. 5, we're going to deliver it to end users. So this is VDI made simple, right? And you're going to look at this and say, well, this really doesn't look that much different than, say, what I'm doing with my on-prem or integration with Citrix Cloud. But where you'll start to see this become more simple is how fast and how simple it is we can get this installed and going. And really, when the Nutanix team and the Frame teams talk about how fast this can be, really, you can have users set up within about 5 minutes of getting a VDI deployment going, connecting to, say, Microsoft Azure. You can have this set up in about 5 minutes and ready to go to some extent. Now, of course, that's going to be relying on how fast you are with installing your applications and other components. But again, it's very simplified. 5 minutes might be over exaggeration. Picking our infrastructure, right? So when we create, once we've decided on what cloud we're going to go to, right? So it's as simple as picking our cloud resource or cloud region that we're going to go to. We get the options to pick our data centers that we're going to live in. So we can spin up multiple pools that are going to be closest to our end user. So if I have the traditional kind of US-based, Europe-based, Asia-based, Australia-based, I can have different pools located in different regions, different data centers for Azure. One thing to note is all of this is done without any sort of necessary load balancing or anything like that. That's all going to be handled directly through Frame itself. So once we've picked our cloud region and our cloud data center, we pick our instance that we want. So we don't actually have to bring our own image. You can, but we don't have to bring our own image. We can actually have one provided to us directly from Frame. It's going to be called our Sandbox image, and you'll see that here in a little bit. But this is what we use to start and build our master image. So we're not having to upload a Windows ISO or pick something that we've got to build from scratch. The Sandbox image comes already pre-optimized from Frame for the cloud provider or for the instance that we're using. And then that's where we're going to install our app. So we're already getting into pre-optimized image ready to go for what we need from an end user perspective. So we bring our identity provider, right? So we set up our authentication. We can do a variety of different ways, the built-in users or whatever directory service that we want. And we can do this both at the pool, at the organization, at the customer level. So you'll see in a couple slides the hierarchy of Frame and how it breaks out. We've got the ability to do a multi-scenario, multi-tenancy hierarchy, each of which is going to have its different authentication and authorization capabilities for accessing desktops. Installing our applications. So every time we spin up a pool, we're going to get that Sandbox VM. Again, that Sandbox VM is the pre-optimized image for us, whether it's Windows 2016, whether we're going to do that for our desktop, Windows 10. It's going to be pre-optimized, and we're going to install whatever applications we need in there. The thing to note is this is going to be kind of that master image. So if we think about Zen Desktop or Horizon View, that's our kind of our linked clone master image, right? This is what we're going to clone from. And the concept in Frame is we still get the persistent and non-persistent desktops. So if it's a persistent desktop, of course, everything's going to be statically assigned and stay throughout multiple logins. But that non-persistent desktop, the Sandbox, is what it's going to be cloned every time the user needs a new desktop. So the sandbox is going to act as that master image. It's going to be spun up. We do what we need in it and then shut it back down, and off we go. Frame provides both capabilities for rich graphics with GPUs. So if you have an application like CAD or Autodesk or anything that requires GPU-backed machines, you can select that when you select the pool type, when you select the instance type for your account, right? So this is going to be done at the pool by pool level. So you can have a GPU-backed pool and a non-GPU-backed pool, and all this is going to be natively handled within Frame for us. Connecting our storage. This is how simple it is to do these one-click integrations with Google Drive, Box, Dropbox, OneDrive. It's a toggle, right? There's nothing we install in that master image. We don't have to install the OneDrive client or the Google Drive client or Dropbox. This is natively integrated right into that Frame image and handled by the Frame agent that's installed in the image that does basically maps a network drive to that user's OneDrive or Dropbox account, and it shows up directly in there. So we're not having to clutter our image with something like the OneDrive client that's going to do synchronization for us. It's all handled under the hood for us through the image with the Frame agent. So that's a nice feature that we can keep things out of our master image without needing to clutter that. So simplified one-click integration for storage. The other neat thing about Frame is it is browser-based, but if you want to get files into and out of, it's just drag and drop, right? So it's as simple as if I need to get a file into my image, I can just drag and drop that Word document from my desktop directly into the browser, and it will directly upload to the Frame image. Now, this is whether that's the sandbox image or the actual end user image. So if I'm an end user and I need to get something into that image or into my session, I can just drag and drop if it's not available in OneDrive or another integrated storage platform for me. So simplified storage access as well. And then finally, we're going to deliver to users, right? So configure our settings. We've got the ability to, simplified setting management, right? So consider what we do today from a printing, from a copy paste, different scenarios that we've got, right? Printing handled by GPOs or other things like that. Copy and paste. How easy is it to enable and disable copy and paste in sessions? With Frame, it's just a toggle button, right? Toggling on printing, toggling on copy paste, toggling on different scenarios that we want the users to be able to have. And then finally, we set a capacity to the pool, just like we normally would on any other VDI solution. We set how many desktops we need. So this is how simple it can be, right? Delivering it to end users, simplified management of the entire ecosystem. So it's great for enterprises and partners. I mentioned this earlier. We can kind of have that multi-tenancy hierarchy of the whole pools and the whole scenario. So, if I'm the customer, if I'm an organization and I've got a Frame entity, I can now create multiple organizations underneath my customer level and then multiple accounts. So, right, so you can see on this screen here, customer has an engineering department, which might have resources located in Azure. The sales department gets resources located in an on-prem Nutanix cluster. And then finally, XYZ client over to the right gets resources provisioned in AWS, right? So we have the ability to have different levels of organizations that have resources that exist in different scenarios or different locations. Engineering could have resources in Azure in the East data center as well as the West data center based on the utilization there. So simplified approach. In each of these levels, we have the capability to set hierarchy for permissions, for the different scenarios of copy paste printing at the different pool levels. All of these are managed as complete subject kind of different areas, right? So easily hierarchy, easily managed. Role-based access support at all levels is what I meant to say the last minute, but simplified, right? Every level I create, I've got the ability to lock users and lock access down as I need based on my organization requirements. So again, 0 to production in minutes, and that's probably a little kind of hard to achieve, but it's simplified, right? If I'm just going to do standard authentication with my Frame accounts with built-in, I pick my infrastructure, I set up my organization, my accounts, I authorize my users to access the desktops, install whatever apps I need, and then deliver it to my end users. And the only thing I have to tell the end users from a Frame access perspective is go to frame.com, log in, and you'll see your desktops. So it's simplified. I don't need to worry about different URLs I've got to give to my end users, or different load balancers to manage how end users are interacting with the desktops, either on-prem or in the cloud, or what location they're accessing. It's all going to be handled directly through the Frame browser for us. So some key advantages around Frame, right? It's cloud native. It's born in the cloud. It never was an on-prem solution that now we're trying to bolt into being cloud managed. It is fully cloud, right? So there's nothing on-prem we have to install. There's nothing on an end user device we have to install. Everything is native to a browser, and that's it. Starts with just 5 users, right? So I can go to frame.com today, sign up with a credit card, get 5 users. This afternoon, I've got desktops provisioned wherever I need them to be provisioned, and off we go. Pay per month, named or concurrent users, simple approach. No additional licensing, right? You log right in. If I need 6 users, I just toggle up and I go from 5 to 6, and I pay that incremental monthly fee for that. It's great, simple user experience. Again, nothing to install from an end user perspective. Run it in a browser. Now, they are working on more of a native client, because there are traditionally some thin clients or kiosks that customers have that the browser is either dated or it just doesn't work well. So they are working on a native client for a variety of platforms. But right now, the user experience is really just browser-based. The admin experience is easy to set up, easy to configure. Updates are basically out of our hands. We don't have to worry about platform updates anymore, licensing updates, things like that. And then the developer experience. If you're a developer shop, great APIs for managing your desktops with Frame. Great capability for spinning up and spinning down dynamically based on how you need to either expand, contract through the APIs that are provided. So great continuous development for shops that need quick and easy development access to machines. From a security perspective, it is FedRAMP ready if you're in an environment that needs high security capabilities. The role-based access control, we do provide, at every level of the organization in the hierarchy, full role-based access control. And then finally, end-to-end encryption built in, right? So everything over the wire, everything through the browser is all encrypted. So nothing is sent clear text. One-click enterprise integrations from an identity perspective. You can see on here we've got Google, Azure AD, Classic Active Directory, and a variety of other different authentication capabilities. From a cloud storage perspective, basically all the big hitters, all native integrations, right? No installation for any of those components. Networking, we've got the ability to go through Direct Connect, VPN, Express Route, however you need to get into your cloud environments, Frame is going to support that. And then finally, the APIs. So if you're a developer shop that lives and breathes being able to integrate your solutions with APIs, full access to the Frame environment, both desktops and management. Power of choice, right? I think this is a crucial one that really, when we look at Nutanix as an overall company, as an overall kind of software, hardware environment, that's a key point for this, right? Freedom of choice. Multiple hybrid clouds, right? I can exist in Azure, AWS, and Nutanix on-prem if I need to, in a variety of different scenarios between those. Workload VMs, on-premise and public cloud. Again, I can pick where I need my workloads to live. And finally, we've got, multiple capabilities for GPU and multiple GPU-powered machines, right? And, if I need a machine that has 8 GPUs or 4 GPUs or 1 GPU, depending on my workload, I've got that capability depending on the cloud provider, right? Modern authentication, variety of Windows and Linux guest OSs, so depending on what I need. Apps and desktops, if I need to publish an application, for example, I've got the capability to just publish an application. Not a great use case with Frame. As we see, most of the use cases are going to be a desktop. Publishing an application inside a browser window is a little weird for an end user perspective, but it's traditionally going to be that desktop. We do have the persistent and non-persistent desktop capabilities. So from a persistent desktop, I can have the same desktop every time I log in. From the non-persistent desktop, that's our traditional linked clones or MCS capabilities that we have on-prem, where every time a user logs out, that desktop is trashed and spun back up. With that, with the non-persistent desktop, of course, we have to ensure that our user's kind of profile is managed and you get the built-in profile management through either group policy, or third-party user environment management tools. So Profile Unity, FS Logics, if you're using those sort of things, that can be integrated with a Frame desktop as well for management. Then finally, the last two, native storage integration, right? So OneDrive, Dropbox, Box, and Google. And then finally, browser access, right? So that native app is coming. That's still it's scheduled for later this year, early next year, based on kind of platform choice. But right now, this is going to work across Windows, Mac, Linux, Chrome OS. Anywhere you've got that modern browser, the desktop is going to work, right? So this kind of gives you that you're not locked into needing to install software on an end user device. You're not locked into having to use a specific platform to be able to access your desktops. So a lot of power of choice with this. Also, there's a free test drive. If you go to frame.com, you'll be able to log in and set up a free test drive. Right now, I think that free test drive is for 2 hours. And what they're going to do is they're going to provision you a temporary tenant with some desktops, and you can do all you need in that 2-hour window just to get a look and feel for how Frame's going to act for you, right? So it's a free test drive. If you're interested in Frame, go out and do it. No harm, no foul. You don't enter a credit card or anything like that. Here's a free 2-hour pass for using a Frame environment in the infrastructure. So very simple to do. Great features there. Let's go ahead and jump into a demo, right? So see how this demo is going to react. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show, hopefully everybody sees my Frame environment now. So I'm going to show kind of what Frame looks like from a console perspective and how it integrates. I've got it integrated with Azure. So you'll be able to see how Frame currently interacts with Azure. And then what we're going to do is we're going to spin up some new pools in an environment in Azure. So you can see how simple it is to be able to provision desktops or provision new scenarios that you need. So with Frame, we start with the customer, right? Customer is that top level. If you remember that slide a couple slides back, customer, organization, and accounts. So customer is me. That's my that's my hierarchy, top of the hierarchy. Organizations are different levels. This would be like my sales, engineering, marketing, things like that. And then accounts is kind of an interesting one for me. It's an odd name. That accounts really kind of can be considered your pools or your kind of your scenarios from an end user perspective, right? This is the account is what I assign my desktops and I provision my desktops against. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and provision a new organization for this. And what we're going to do is that's been done. I'm going to go ahead and provision an account for it. So provisioning an account, I associate it to my organization. So we're going to choose the eGroup webinar. And we'll just leave the name and URL name as is. And I get to choose my cloud provider. So we're going to go ahead and choose Azure. Now, I've already tied Azure and the East Data Center, East US2 to my account. And I can now choose the instance that I want down here. So I get the options between Windows 2016, 2012 R2, and Windows 10. I'm going to go ahead and choose Windows 10, choose my instance type, right? So depending on what my workloads are going to look like, I can choose a variety of different instances. It's going to be one instance type per account. So if you have multiple instance types, maybe I have just kind of a standard worker with with one desktop type, and say I need a professional or kind of a higher powered desktop, I can choose one with a GPU. That will be associated to another account. So like I said, the term account is a little misleading to me. This is more like the pool or the grouping of desktops that I want for a specific workload or specific environment. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this Air 4 gig and increase as I need. A couple things I do since I already have other environments set up. Oops, sorry. I'm going to go ahead and customize my VPC. VPC is going to be for those that are working in Azure AWS. This is our VNet or truly our VPC in AWS. So this is going to assign my VNet at the Azure level. So I'm going to go ahead and do choose my address space here. I'm not going to choose persistent desktop. I don't need my users to have the same desktop every time they log in. I'm going to go ahead and create. Once I do that, we'll see that it creates the account in the screen. And what we'll see here in a second, we'll see additions start to pop up at my Azure level. So this takes a couple seconds for it to actually kick in. And what we're doing here again is this is provisioning that pool, provisioning the accounts needed in Frame, and at the same time, it's going to start the integration with Azure. So it's going to go, it will be automatically reaching out to Azure, creating the VNets for me automatically that I assign. So 172.16.0.0 will automatically be created. And it's also going to create that Sandbox VM automatically for me based on the instance type that I chose. So again, all this is fully integrated. I'm not having to go to Azure and create a new VNet and create my, choose my instance that I want and other items. This quickly and easily does everything for me, all natively. So we can kind of just keep an eye on as things are popping up in here. I notice that I've got a new VNet being provisioned based on the address space that I want. And I've also got a new virtual machine running now based on the instance that I just provided. So we'll see the eGroup webinar. So this is my account or my pool of desktops. And if I go ahead and click on that, it's going to take me out to my dashboard for this pool. And what this is going to show me is this is going to be my sandbox. My sandbox is being provisioned right now. And the sandbox, again, is what I would do all my master image customizations to, right? So if you think about what we do today on-prem with our master images, we quickly stand up whatever OS we need, and then we run some optimization tools and tweak the desktop as we need, right? If you're a Citrix shop, you run the Citrix VDI optimizer. If you're a VMware shop with Vue, you run the VMware VDI optimizer against the image. All this is being done for us under the hood as Frame is provisioning the desktop. So we'll see that as this is going, this is going to be that sandbox master image. I don't need to connect to anything at this point in time, but we can see that, again, that under the hood, this has been provisioned for me. So I've got a VM running. My virtual networks was provisioned specifically for this desktop. A couple extra things here to note on our sandbox. Notice there's applications. So when you install an application in Frame, it detects and says, hey, you just installed an application. Would you also like this application to be published? So if I wanted to publish, say, Visio from this master image, I could just publish Visio by itself, and the user would not need to connect to a desktop. It would be provisioned off of that desktop, but it would not be connecting to that desktop. Again, everything is going to be browser-based, so that's all I'm going to see. So while this is being provisioned, which I want to take you back to, we'll switch out to my persistent desktop. And we can see that at this point in time, my sandbox is powered off, meaning it's in a down state. If I needed to kind of connect to it to manage it, I could quickly power it on. But at this point in time, this is ready to go. So I can publish from this sandbox. And this is already published, so let me jump back here. So notice that before I can publish anything, I'm going to set up capacity, right? This is just like setting up our pool capacity. We're going to set up how many instances I need, right? So say I need 5 instances. Buffer instances, maybe I need 2. The max number of instances will be 3. Active capacity, what time it's going to be active from. And all I got to do is click save here. So set for 0. I have the live demo joy. Let's see, settings. All right, we were going to come back to that then. The live demo. So I'm going to go ahead and just power this on. I mean, we can see what the actual desktop will look like. So powering on my sandbox, again, powering on my sandbox is going to look just like the normal desktop would from an end user perspective. This is going to provide me the capability to install any of my applications that I need and then be provisioned as that master desktop. So if I look in here into Azure, I will now see a machine running. So this one right here, this prod 6259, I know ties back to my master desktop here. Note, and the one thing to note is that you don't need to connect through a remote desktop or anything like that to get to this image. Once this image is started, I connect directly through the Frame environment. So I connect directly through my browser. A couple things with Frame is that if you have applications that require things like licensing servers or database servers that kind of tie with the instance, there's a concept called utility servers. We've got the ability to spin up utility servers that might provide capabilities like licensing for an application or other scenarios that I might need. Think maybe a file server, something like that. So quick capabilities for being able to quickly provision additional resources that go with an application as needed. So let's see if my sandbox is not still waiting for it to start. So while we are waiting for this to start, let's jump back over to here. Almost ready. So we can see that my provisioning is almost ready for the eGroup webinar pool that I created. Again, not much I can do here until this point gets ready, right? But we've got the ability, there we go, start session. So I'll go ahead and start the session, and you'll notice that quickly what I'm doing now is connecting to the Frame desktop, connecting directly to that desktop from within my browser, within the Frame session. There's my desktop, right? So this is considered my master image. Everything I need here, I can modify, install, customize as needed. A couple things to note. Down in the bottom right corner, you'll see the latency to the desktop. So currently I have about 22 milliseconds latency to the desktop. That's, again, connecting from my session here, my laptop at home, connecting to the desktop running in Azure. Over here to the right, you notice distance to server. It's also calculating kind of how far I am from the East US 2 data center. So I can see what kind of latency I'm getting as the closer and further away I get to the data center. So I can understand what my latency is going to be like from a perspective of connecting to resources in different locations. And then finally, my session stats. How much traffic am I doing? What am I actually going through, right? So this is my master desktop, right? So if I need to copy things into it, I can. If I need to, customize this image, I can, no problems. So when I'm done with this image, I can just go ahead and close my session. If I need to, I can change settings. I can up my max frame per second. I can customize image quality here. I can also change my resolution. So dynamically changing it based on what I need. I'm going to go ahead and close this session. And the next step would be to publish it. Once I publish it, that essentially becomes my desktop, right? So now I provision it for users. This persistent pool, as you'll see, if I go to the launch pad, I've got the desktop sessions already ready. So the launch pad is what the end users would see. They'd see their desktops, they'd see their applications. I can quickly and easily click the desktop to launch. And I believe I've got this one powered down, but that's how simple it is to connect to a desktop. So from a demo perspective, pretty simple, right? Spinning up machines, spinning up environments. So from an Azure perspective, the virtual networks get spun up pretty easily. The machines spin up. So you'll always have your sandbox image will always be deallocated and stopped unless you're needing to power it on to customize that image, right? The rest of the time you'd see running instances as necessary. So let's hop back over to PowerPoint. So that was the demo. Quick .next update for those that are interested in hearing about what came out of, what came out of .next. So a couple of big updates came out of .next, right? First off was the announcement from Frame that on-prem workloads would be supported. Up until a couple months ago, the only supported workloads were both AWS and Azure. Now with Frame going forward, Nutanix has provided support for the Acropolis hypervisor on-prem. So from an end user perspective, I can now have resources both in the cloud, AWS and Azure, and in on-prem Nutanix Acropolis cluster as I need. So that's the first big update from Next. Second big update is Nutanix Mine, which is a backup appliance. So kind of a scale out backup appliance that is on Nutanix hardware, running Nutanix software capabilities. So it integrates tightly with the full Nutanix cluster ecosystem, right? So the same Prism interface that we have today managing our Nutanix clusters now manages our scale out backup repository. And what we're going to see is that multiple backup vendors such as Commvault, Veeam, and others are going to provide integrations directly to Mine. The first one today is going to be with Commvault and Veeam. And so what we'll see now is the quick capabilities to back up a Nutanix environment onto a Nutanix Mine appliance, which has all the analytics and capabilities of our existing Nutanix clusters, but from a backup perspective. So that's the second big integration. And then the third big, some of the announcements is going to be around Nutanix Beam, which is your cloud capacity and security analyzer, being able to now not provision, but assess security capabilities on the cloud. So ensuring that like I said earlier, the cloud is an operational model, not a destination, but it's a destination that we still have to manage from a security perspective, right? So we have to be able to understand what's going on in our cloud. So Beam will actually provide you the capability to understand security kind of risks in an environment. If certain settings are on or off, there's over 250 plus security settings that Beam will constantly be checking for in the security perspective. And also does capacity-based analysis as well, telling you that, hey, these VMs are oversized, these VMs are, right-sized, but they could be tweaked a little bit. So all the pricing for that is done based on the capacity of what it's currently analyzing. So those are the three big announcements from .next. A lot more to come from Nutanix. The roadmap has been great, but really the Frame announcements and the Frame capabilities that they've been demoing and showing off really greatly greatly simplifies VDI deployments, right? If I need to quickly scale by 50 users or 50 desktops, it's as simple as going into Frame and increasing my number from 5, 10, up to 50, and those desktops will automatically be spun up. When I'm done, I just decrease that number back down to 5 or 10 or whatever I need. And again, I'm dynamically and quickly scaling up and scaling down. So with that, I'll turn it over to any questions that we might have, anything I can answer. Be happy to discuss a little bit further on what might have piqued your interest.
Okay, Mike, it looks like we did have a few questions come through. So with our remaining time, we'll see if we can fit all three in. How easy is it to scale up and down with Frame?
Yeah, absolutely. Scaling up and down with Frame is truly as simple as clicking an up and down arrow on our pools, right? On our accounts, we can go in and set our capacity. So the scenario I kind of gave earlier where a customer maybe needs to go from 25 to 50 desktops based on seasonal use, right? So it's as simple as going into our account and just increasing the capacity on that pool, and those additional desktops would be spun up at that given time. So once that utilization is done, it's as simple as going back into the account and clicking the down arrow or choosing our number that we need to decrease that number. Those VMs will be deallocated. And again, because this is, a cloud-based infrastructure, we're paying only for what we use when we spin up. So once we spin back down, our costs come back down. So it's very linear to understand what our costs will be by scaling by 25, 50, or 100 desktops based on utilization. Different than what we would take into account for an on-prem solution, where if I need to scale by 50 desktops or 100 desktops, how do I understand my infrastructure requirements to be able to scale? So from the Frame perspective, scaling up and scaling down is pretty easy. It's easier than any other solution I've seen from the capabilities and speed of provisioning those additional desktops.
All right, and then we also have, how do we manage profiles with Frame?
Yeah, great question, especially with this being a cloud native solution. So one of the things I touched on earlier is that you can manage it with your existing on-prem profile manager, right? So Frame VMs can be joined to your existing Active Directory, and we can use existing group policy to do things like roaming profiles or even mandatory profiles. or if you're using something like FS Logics, you can integrate that. One of the nice things about Frame is out of the box, you can use their direct integration with Liquidware's Profile Unity. So we've got Profile Unity built into the Frame environment, into the ecosystem, that provides us the capability right out of the box for non-persistent desktops for users to have profiles managed directly through Frame. So if you don't want to have to manage another profile solution or manage profiles at all, directly within Frame, we can enable profile management. Again, Frame has an agreement with Liquidware to provide Profile Unity native integration directly to Frame desktops for non-persistence. So again, quickly and easily, we have profile management right out of the box. Nothing we have to manage on our own.
All right, and then last question today is, can I provision to anything other than AWS, Azure, or AHV?
Yep, at this point in time, no, right? So there's no, Google is on the roadmap from a provisioning perspective. It's kind of an early release right now, and there's limited functionality, limited images that are used over there. For right now, it is just going to be AWS and Azure from a cloud native perspective. From an on-premise perspective, right now, the plans are for Frame to only support AHV. So there is no roadmap, at least at this point in time, for Frame on VMware, for example, from an on-prem perspective. So it's just going to be an AHV solution, the Acropolis hypervisor, that's going to have integration with Frame. Today, it's through what they call the Frame Cloud Connectors, and in future roadmap releases, it's going to be built directly into Prism from a Frame perspective. So to integrate my on-prem Nutanix AHV cluster to Frame directly, it's just going to be a toggle button in Prism to integrate those two. So again, today, just going to be AWS and Azure from a cloud native perspective, with Google coming. Again, potential roadmaps for IBM and some other additional clouds as they look to continue to grow out Frame. And from an on-prem perspective, it's only going to be the Acropolis hypervisor. Just 3 questions, that's it?
I know, it looks like we might have had a hand raised. Hang on one second. Jeremiah, did you have a question? Nope, maybe not. All righty, well, if there weren't any other questions, I mean, if you do find,
Yeah, I think we've got a question. Let's see. So, any ETA on client for Thin Zero clients? The roadmap that I saw at .next and through some other discussions with the Frame team is they're still evaluating on what devices they, things like Teradici and Tenzig. They've looked at doing the integration with. I think Tenzig is they're a little bit more faster with the roadmap for Tenzig than some of the others. Right now, it's looking at third quarter to fourth quarter to kind of have those initial native clients available, or native integration, for thin clients. So right now, I think Tenzig is kind of the one at the forefront of what they're going to be doing the initial integrations with some of the others coming shortly thereafter, of course, based on different use cases. All right. Next question. DR options look like for this? That's an interesting question, right? So what does DR option look like for Frame? Well, really, from a cloud perspective, we can just spin up our DR desktops in another Azure region, or even in another cloud potentially, right? So we can say, if we don't want to kind of put all our eggs in the AWS or Azure basket, we can split our pools between clouds. We can also split our pools in the same clouds through different regions and different data centers. So from a VDI perspective, from a non-persistency, a lot of times we don't have true DR where we're replicating those desktops. We might be replicating the master image, but we do have capabilities from the Frame perspective to, again, spin pools up in different regions and different data centers, as well as that master image can be backed up and replicated. So we're managing a single one. So from a DR perspective, nothing too creative, other than really replicating that master image over to another data center and provisioning the desktops from there. Can you replicate desktops inside? I think the answer to that one is going to be that the use case there is going to be that Sandbox, the the backing up and replicating of that sandbox image, and then we use that to provision the different accounts in different regions or different clouds. So there's some limited functionality, of course, crossing between AWS and Azure from that perspective right now. But so a lot of times we're not going to see that happening. But if we're doing it within different Azure regions or different AWS regions, then we do have the capability to move those sandbox images between. Hopefully that answered the 3 questions that I saw pop in.
All right. If there's no more questions, and if any of you find yourselves with additional questions following today's webinar, please reach out to us via egroup-us.com. But a big thank you to Mike for today's presentation, and thank you to everyone in attendance for taking time out of your day to tune in. And we hope that you all have a great rest of your week.